Good morning, guys. We have been going through the series of faith, looking at Hebrews 11, this Hall of Faith. And this morning, I just want to share a story with you guys. As I said, we've been going through this series, and we've looked at the patriarchs, and we've looked at their faith. And then we transitioned, and we looked at the leaders through the Exodus, and we looked at how their faith, we can look to them. And we want to aspire to be more like them. And as we're closing up the chapter in chapter Hebrews 11, there's a verse that I want to read. It says, verse 32, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets." The writer is saying, we don't have enough time to go through all these names and talk about how each one of them showed great, amazing faith. Well, this morning, I want to do exactly that. I want to go through and look at this, as we start this new series of unlikely leaders in the book of Judges. We're going to start with Gideon. And in a little bit, I'm going to stand at the podium, and I'm going to tell you guys a story from the perspective of Purah. And this is, Purah was one of the servants of Gideon. And I want you guys to see his perspective. But before we do that, we're going to set the stage. So if you have your devices or your Bibles, you can turn to Judges chapter 6. And to set this stage, we've been through Exodus. We were in the land of Egypt, and we have traveled through the wilderness. We have seen God's mighty glory. We have seen Him send plagues on the Egyptians. We have seen Him give us water and food from the heavens. And now we're in this land. Joshua led us and conquered town after town, and now we're in the book of Judges. And the Judges had this cycle of sin. And the Judges, throughout the book, we continue to see this cycle where Israel served the Lord faithfully. And whenever they served the Lord faithfully, God blessed their land, and they lived securely in the land. And then Israel started to fall into idolatry. They started following the ways of the people all around them. And whenever they did that, God would send in a nation and enslave them or persecute them and take all their food. And it was never a good time in the land of Israel. And then Israel would always repent. They would turn back to God. And God would hear their cry, and God would raise up a judge. And as I said, today we're looking at one of the judges named Gideon. So I'm going to read Judges chapter 6, starting at verse 1. "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel. And because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains, and caves, and strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, and they would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste to the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian. And the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord." So this is the setting. This is where we are at. The people are living in the mountains. They are living in the caves of the land. And we're going to look at where we find Gideon. So I'm going to step to the podium, and I'm going to tell you guys a story from the perspective of one of the servants of Gideon. Well, good morning. My name is Purah, and I have faithfully served my master Gideon for a very long time. We have been through almost every season of life together. I remember when I first started serving his family, and it was good times. But then people in the town, they started serving Baal. And it was about that same time when Midian just started coming, and it was hard times. They burned our farm. They burned all of our crops. And so we had to start trying to come up with new ways to get food. And man, my master Gideon, he was a young boy when I first started working, but I just saw him grow up to be a great man of faith. Gideon was just a great man of faith. It was amazing to see. And I remember during those 7 years of hard times, being on the brink of starvation, almost dying so many times, but Gideon always had just such amazing faith. And I remember how it all started. It was we were doing some of the chores around the house, and we had come up with a new way to start getting the wheat. We would thresh the wheat inside of a wine press so the Midianites wouldn't come and take our food. And that seemed to be working for a pretty good while, so we stuck with it. I remember this one time that we were threshing the wheat in the wine press, and this messenger, this stranger, came up to us. And so Gideon goes and talks to him, and I'm still threshing the wheat, and I overhear this conversation, and this stranger, who neither one of us know, says, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." And I remember I was like, what? Like, what is happening? And Gideon, you should have seen his face. It was just like, he was so confused. And he was, what? Like, the Lord is with, see, how can God be with us? We had both grown up hearing so many stories of Yahweh's power. We had heard the stories of our fathers in Egypt and how he just sent frogs and turned the Nile to blood, and the Passover, and how he led them through the Red Sea. And we heard all these great stories, but where were they? I mean, it had been 7 years, and this is what Gideon is telling the stranger. He said, how can God be with us when all of this is happening? And this messenger looks at him. He says, yes, your frustration, everything about you is right. Everything about you, said, I chose you to lead the people out of this oppression. Oh, man. So something you need to know about my master Gideon and kind of his family. There's a reason you don't hear a whole lot about the tribe of Manasseh. They just, didn't do a whole lot. So my master was from the tribe of Manasseh, and so it's not the largest or most well-known tribe, and even if it were, Gideon's family wasn't even from a very popular clan, and so he was kind of on the lower end of the totem pole. But even more than that, he was the youngest of all of his brothers, and this messenger saying, "I choose you to lead Israel out of this oppression," and Gideon was just like dumbstruck. He was like, "What? Like me? Like how can that be?" And this messenger said, "The Lord will be with you." And Gideon was like, "Okay, hold on." He said, and I'm just watching all of this happen. He said, "Okay, hold on. If you're from God, let me go give you a gift." Us, Middle Eastern hospitality, we had to give this messenger a gift. So he said, "Purah, come with me. We're gonna make dinner." I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "So you take care of the goat, I'll make the bread." So he's over here making the bread, and I take a goat, I kill it, I skin it, I gut it, I cook it. And I mean, the poor guy, he's probably hungry. He's been waiting forever. It takes a long time to prepare this meal. And so finally, he takes all this food that we just made, some bread, some broth, and this lamb, and he gives it to him. And I remember watching this from a distance. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So Gideon, my master, puts this food on a rock, and this messenger takes his staff, touches the sacrifice with the end of his staff, and then just poof, up in flames and smoke it goes. And it just disappeared along with the messenger. This food just gone up in smoke, and the angel, which we found out was from God. And once Gideon found out that this messenger was from God, he dropped to the floor. He was so scared. I didn't really understand his God that well, so I didn't really understand what was going on. But Gideon was terrified. And he told me later, he said, I was so scared. I said, why, Master Gideon? He said, because I realized that this messenger was from God. And you need to understand, people who see the face of God don't live. And I was like, oh, shoot, I saw that guy's face too. Like, I should have died. And Gideon was like, no, it was okay. I heard the voice of God. I said, you heard the voice of God? He said, yes, I heard the voice of God. And he told me I was going to be okay and I wasn't going to die. And I was like, okay, good. That means I'm not going to die too. So it was a good relief. And it was just one of the most bizarre days in my life. And that's what started this whole adventure. And so I knew, like I said, Gideon's God must have chose him because of his faith. He was always just such a great man of faith. And that night, I remember we were in the tent, and Gideon comes in, and he's pacing the room. He's kind of pacing back and forth. And it was like kind of odd. And I was like, Master, what's happening? He says, well, I heard the voice of God again. And I said, you heard the voice of God again? He said, yes, I did. I said, well, that's amazing. What did he say? He said, well, he told me that I need to go and tear down the altar to Baal. And I said, oh, well, that is something God told you, isn't it? He said, yeah, and the people of the village are not going to be happy. And I said, no, they sure aren't. They really like that altar to Baal. He said, yeah, I know. So we're going to do it because I have faith in God. And I was like, that's right. That's my master. You got all the faith in the Lord. He said, yeah, except we're going to go at night. I said, okay, we'll go at night. That's not a problem. So my master Gideon told me, he said, you and 9 other people, we're going to go and we're going to tear down this altar. And so we got on all black and we went out, and it was so much fun. We were sneaking around. I haven't snuck out of the house since I was like very little. And so it was fun to be able to relive all this again. And so we went out, and I never really liked the God of Baal anyway. So we're tearing down this altar, and we're cutting down this Asherah pole, and we sacrificed to his God. We sacrificed a bull on top of his altar. It was so amazing. And so we sneaked back into the house. And Gideon said, okay, don't tell anyone. I said, I'm not going to tell anyone. Someone snitched, and it wasn't me. Someone snitched and told the townspeople who did it. So the next morning, townspeople are all, they're coming with their pitchforks. And I was like, Gideon, I promise it wasn't me. He's like, I know, Purah, it's okay. I was like, okay, good. I just want you to know that. And so they're coming, and they're out to get my master Gideon. But his dad steps in, classic dad. Always wanted to defend Gideon. And he says to the townspeople, he says, if Baal is a real God, then Baal can contend for himself. If Baal is a real God, he'll kill Gideon if that's his wish. And I was like, oh, Baal, please don't kill Gideon. He's my master and I love him. But it was okay. And just seeing Gideon's faith through that, I mean, we did do it at night. So, that was the 3rd time Gideon had heard the voice of God. But, it's okay to be scared. The townspeople are very scary. But after that day, something happened to Gideon. And I know what it was. The spirit of his God came upon him. And I could see it. He walked a little taller. His shoulders were back. And the spirit of God was on him. And then he did something crazy. He called for the army of Israel. No one had gathered against the Midianites in years. And so he called all the people around Israel to come, and we're going to fight against the Midianites. It was amazing. And I remember we were gathered there, and there were about 32,000 men. I know that sounds like a large number, but it is. It was so many. But you see, the Midianites were beyond count. We couldn't even count their camels, let alone them. And but I knew my master had it under control. He was such a man of faith. He had heard from the Lord so many times. Except that night after we gathered the 32,000, it was a little confusing. I heard him pray to his God. He said, God, I know you're with me, but just can you please give me a sign? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put fleece on the ground. And if there's dew on the fleece in the morning and not anywhere else, then I'll know you're with me. And I was a little confused. I mean, I had seen pagan divination before, trying to see what the God's favor was. And I was kind of confused because I was like, Gideon, you've heard from the God at least, from your God at least like 4 times now. Like, but that's okay. My master is a man of great faith, and it worked. The next morning there was dew on the fleece, and he wrung it out and filled an entire bowl full of water. It was soaked. It was amazing. And I was like, okay, Gideon, like, we're ready. We're going to go attack the Midianites. But he did it again. That night, he asked God for another sign. He said, okay, God, please don't be angry at me. Please don't kill me, but I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure with us. Can you make, in the morning, I'm going to lay the fleece out. And can you make sure the fleece is dry and dew on all the grass around? And I was thinking, Gideon, like, Master, we've heard the voice of God. He's protected us from the townspeople. We've gathered so many men here. Surely he's with us, but why are you asking God? But no. My master is full of faith. He's one of the most faith-filled people I know. So that day we were camped at the pool of Herod when we're getting ready for battle. Except Gideon comes up to me, and he looks distraught and confused, and I say, Master Gideon, what's going on? He says, well, God spoke to me again. I was like, oh, that's great. I love it when your God speaks to you. Great things always happen when your God speaks to you. He says, yeah, except here's the thing. He told me to send home anyone who's afraid. He says we have too many people. I was like, it's usually not how battles work. But you're the man of great faith, and I trust in you. So just go around and tell people they can go home if they're afraid. And Gideon's like, yeah. So can you help me do that? And I was like, sure. So I started walking through the camp, and I'd go up to him. I say, hey, are you afraid? The guy was like, yeah. I was like, well, congratulations. I guess you can go back to your tent. And he was like, okay. And I didn't know how many people were so afraid. So many people were afraid. 22,000 men went back to their tents. It was amazing. So we were left with only 10,000 men against numerous, too many to count Midianites. And Gideon came up to me. He said, Purah, we have another problem. I said, what's that? He said, we still have too many men. I was like, we just sent home 22,000. Like, what? How do we? Gideon, you're the faith-filled man. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. He said, okay, this is what my God told me to do. He said, we're going to go drink from the spring of Herod, and any man who leans down and drinks like a dog with his tongue, send him home. And any man who scoops it up and drinks it, keep. I was like, okay. We probably won't send that many home. Like, most people are decent and drink with their hands. I didn't know how many barbarians were living in Israel at that time. I was like, come on, guys. So we went down to the creek, and everyone started drinking. And so many men put their heads down to drink like dogs. So I went by, and I said, okay, you go home. Okay, you go home. Okay, you. And then I was like, finally, someone decent who's actually drinking water from their hands. I was like, you get to stay. And we kept 300 men. We kept 300 men, and so we were ready for battle. We knew where the enemy was. The enemy was at the valley of Jezreel. The enemy was at the valley of Jezreel, and Gideon told me, he said, okay, I'm going to attack tonight. I was like, awesome, finally. I don't know how we're going to do it. He said, but I'm a little scared. I said, well, we've heard from God. I mean, you've heard from God like 4 or 5 times now. He's told you, He's with you, but you're the faith-filled one. He said, my God told me that I can take you, and we're going to go to the camp at the valley of Jezreel, and we're gonna see a sign from God. I said, okay. So we snuck in, and we overheard a conversation between two comrades. And I couldn't catch all of it, but it sounded like one of them had a bizarre dream. And one of them is listening to his friend, and his friend is telling him about this dream he had. And it's something about a piece of cake, a piece of barley, rolls into a camp and hits tents, and the tent overturns and falls down. I was like, man, I have dreams like that all the time. They're just weird dreams. But this man said, oh, I know what that is. It is no other than the sword of Gideon. And he's going to come and destroy this entire camp of Midianites. I was like, I don't know how he got that from barley, but all right, dude. And then Gideon knew. That was when Gideon knew that God was with him. And so we stepped aside and we praised God. And this whole time, I'm a little confused. Gideon had so many signs from God, and yet he still doubted some. Maybe my master wasn't as faith-filled as I had once thought. But anyway, we go back to camp, and Gideon takes the 300 men, and he splits them up into groups of 100. He says, follow my lead. So we surround the camp, and 300 people doesn't really do a whole lot for this massive valley. And so we have torches, and we have trumpets, and we have pots. And Gideon says, follow my lead. And so we do. We surround the camp, and on his cue, we blow our trumpets, and we smash our jars, and we yell, for the sword of Gideon and for the Lord. And whenever we do that, this whole valley just goes into chaos. All the Midianites' army are just starting to fight each other. And it was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Gideon's God had done it. It wasn't by anything we did. They started attacking each other before we could even get there. It was only by the power of God. And my master, he didn't have the most faith. I'm sorry to say, I love my master, and I serve him faithfully. But over the years, I started to realize maybe Gideon isn't as full of faith as I had once thought. But that's something I realized about Gideon's God. Gideon's God uses the smallest amount of faith to show how humongous his power is. That's something I realized. Gideon's God, he doesn't need you to have all the faith in the world. He just wants you to have a little bit of faith, and he'll show you how humongous, how powerful he really is. That's something I learned. I learned that if you serve the God of Gideon, if you serve his God, he just uses a little bit of your faith to show how much his humongous power is. And that's my story of Perah.